Good morning. Today I'm going to be tying up just pretty basic but effective fly. It's going to be a PMD, or pale morning dun. I'm tying this up because it looks like they may be hatching on the waters locally here. I'm using a sheer 14-aught thread, 16 size dry fly hook in the vise. And I'm not really following a pattern, but my guess is that someone else has tied this before, so I'm certainly not going to call this my own creation here. I'm going to tie this parachute style, so we have a parachute wing on it. And for the parachute, what I like to use, for me personally, and you can use different things obviously, but I like this McFlylon for my parachute. And again, this is all preference in terms of how you want to tie things on. I like to tie the post on at the very beginning, but certainly I've seen others that do it after they put the tail and the abdomen in place. So again, there's not necessarily a right way or a wrong way here. So here's my piece of McFlylon. I've got my thread positioned pretty close to where I want that post to be. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to work on securing that McFlylon down, and I'm just going to take a few wraps backwards with it, not too many because I don't want to have an overly bulky body here, but I do want to make sure that's nice and tight. So once I have that in, I'm going to go ahead and lift the back end of this McFlylon, and then I'm going to cut it, and by cutting it like this on an angle, we should get an angle. My scissors are getting dull, which is sad. And so to make this just a tiny little bit more robust, this is just a preference of mine, I'm going to add a little bit of super glue or Zap Gap right here. And then that's just going to solidify everything, especially as I keep tying. I'm going to go ahead and take some wraps backwards and get my thread back on the hook. You can see that super glue kind of sticking out there, probably a little bit more than what I would usually want. So nothing wrong with taking your fingers and kind of getting rid of some of that. I'm going to take a look at my post now, and I'm going to want to bring it up a little bit further, not a lot but a little bit. So I'm just going to carefully take a few more wraps of thread up towards the eye. Once I get to about here, I'm going to stand that McFlylon up, and I'm going to take some jam wraps, which are basically wraps right up against the base of that material. And what that's going to do, it's going to help that wing stand straight up. Just like so. From here, what I'm going to do is come back on the back side of this again, and I'm going to start taking some thread wraps now around the post itself. That's one of the reasons I like this McFlylon a little bit, is it's a little bit stiffer. So it makes it a little bit easier to do these posts. And this post is going to be used for us to wind our hackle up. And that hackle is going to kind of represent the legs. And we will make this post somewhat recognize the upstanding wing that you'll see on a pale morning dun or a PMD. So once I have that all in place, I'm going to go ahead and grab my super glue again, my Zap Gap, and turn my fly a little bit on its side. I'm just going to add a little bit of this onto the post itself, again just to stabilize it, make it a little bit stronger. That's about all I'm doing there with those extra thread wraps. Being a size 16, I have some margin of error in terms of bulk, but I do want to be kind of conscientious of my thread wraps here. So now we'll go ahead and we'll start moving on back. Even though I'm not tying this in quite yet, for the body, I'm going to use a turkey Biot. I'm just going to use this UV2. And it's in a PMD or a pale morning dun kind of a color. this is what that feather is going to look like. And I'm just going to take my scissors and try to isolate a single one of these. So hopefully that's viewable. And clip it clear down at the base here. And once I have that clipped right at the base, I should be able to slide this Biot right off, just like that. The reason I put this, cut that off at this point is because I like to stick this in my mouth. And just let it soften a little bit. And then I'll tie the tails in, and then by the time I tie my Biot in, it'll be a little bit more flexible, because these can be very ginger. And then I'll have to try to talk with a feather in my mouth. I'm going to go to some microfibbets for our tail here. And even though the tail is pretty small in this fly, I'm going to make it a little bit beefier. So I've got that little bundle of microfibbets, and now I'm looking at length. That's about where I want it. If I tie this in here like that, then I'm not adding more bulk. I've already got quite a bit of bulk right behind the post, and that's, I think I just swallowed my Biot. No, I didn't. There it is. But don't swallow your fly tying material. Okay, tip number one. But yeah, right through here, you can see how much thicker the body is, and then it jumps down off this ledge. And that's because we had this material that we tied in for the post. We're going to want this somewhat tapered, so I don't want to put too many more wraps up there by the post. What I do want is for the fly to begin having that taper. So I'm going to take this all the way back to the bend of the hook, and once I get back there, I'm just going to loosely go around underneath those fibbets, and then I can pull my thread towards the eye of the hook, and that's just going to help those with the pressure. You got to keep your pressure on this, or that'll just slip. But this is going to help get those those tail fibers either splayed out or at least upward. So hopefully you can see that. And once I get to this point, I am good to go ahead and cut off the excess of these fibbets. And again, I want to keep them right at that back end of where I tied in that post, so that we just minimize the bulk here as much as we can. And with those cut off, I'm going to go ahead and turn my thread a little bit counterclockwise a few times. What that's going to do, sometimes I use that to make the thread jump backwards when I'm working with material. Here I'm doing it more to keep a nice flat spread out piece of thread here, so I'm not building quite as much bulk, and it will work on creating that more tapered body. We'll do a little bit more work on that, but for right now I'm going to go ahead and grab my Biot that I was eating a few minutes ago right here, and we're going to go ahead and tie this in right about there. That works. I'll give myself a little bit of extra thread here as I secure this. You don't want to crank down on your thread too hard for two reasons. One, it'll break. Number two, it'll cut right through your Biot and it will break, and we don't want that. So especially as I get closer to the tails here, where I want this abdomen to begin, I am going to be a little bit looser in terms, I'm not cranking down on that thread, because I don't want to cut into this this Biot here. But once I'm back here, I can go ahead and crank down pretty good, just not so hard that I break my thread. And I've got that tied in. I'll just go ahead and turn my vise a little bit, and I'm going to grab that tail in with my tips of my scissors and just go ahead and clip that right off. So that's ready to go. So from here, I'm just going to, I really want a nice smooth area for my Biot to travel up towards the back end here. And so you'll see I'm just doing some thread work here just to try to, and you'll see I do turn my vise from time to time, and I know when I'm tying this on video sometimes that is not overly helpful because you can't see what the hell I'm doing, but all I'm doing here is some of that thread work to try to work on that taper. And what I'll do when I get here, and this is again just personal preference, I'm just going to grab my whip finisher and throw a couple of half hitches in, maybe just one. I don't want to build up the bulk, but what I do want to do is I want to put this thread on my bobbin cradle so I can move it out of the way. And the reason why I put the knot in is it'll just help keep that thread from coming unwound as I use the rotary feature here on my vise. And if you want to be extra careful, and we'll do it here, I didn't do it on the, I've been tying a few of these up this morning, but one thing you can do to cheat a little bit is just add, again, a little bit of this Zap-A-Gap where we're about ready to put this buyout on it, and it'll just kind of help you a little bit, help us stay on. And then from here, we're just going to grab my hackle pliers. I'm going to put those on the back end of this buyout. This is where you want to be very gentle. You want enough tension that you're getting a good wrap, but not so much of tension that it breaks the buyout off. And these buyouts are very, very, very fragile, especially on this tip end. And you'll see me exaggerating a little bit, like right here. And the reason I am is because if I bring this buyout across and hit that hook point, it's going to weaken it, or it's going to just cut right through it. And that's not what we want. The reason I like using the buyout here, I mean, you can do just a thread body, you can use a super fine dubbing body. I just like the buyout just because it's going to give us a bit of a ribbing, nice ribbing actually on the pattern. And you can see we're running out of space, so I'm just going to go ahead and move my bobbin cradle out of the way and tighten up my thread a little bit. And I'm just going to go ahead and take a couple of wraps over the top of that buyout here, just to lock it in place. And you don't need 50 wraps, just a couple wraps will do. With that, I can just squeeze my hackle pliers and let go. And we've got a nice ribbed body going on here. I'm going to come in with my scissors and clip off that little excess end of the turkey buyout. From there, I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to move up right behind the post. And at this point, I'm going to tie in what I'm going to use for the legs, a hackle. And I'm just going to use a done hackle. It's appropriately sized, maybe a little bit bigger than a 16. It may be closer to a 14, but I don't mind that. These fellows tend to have fairly long legs, so you don't want it out of control, but I don't mind it being one size too big. I'm going to go ahead and set that right behind the post as I tie it in. And once I get one turn on it there, I want it to stand straight up for me. So I'm going to take a wrap or two on the back side of it, back towards the bend of the hook. And you'll see that our hackle's now standing straight up a little bit more. The other thing that you'll want to notice here is that I have bare stem right through here. And the reason is because what I want to do, and what I will be doing right now, is I want to attach that hackle to my post, not to the shank of the hook. We certainly secured it to the shank of the hook to start with, but from here I'm going to do just like we did before, where I'm going to just kind of tie up the post a little bit, and now my hackle is actually attached to the post and not to the hook itself. Now you'll see why that's important here in just a moment, but we're going to go ahead and take that down, back down. And once I get this back down to the base, then I'm going to start back with wraps on the hook itself. And you'll see as I start wrapping up towards the eye, that stem is going to start sticking straight out. I don't want to go clear up to the eye here before I clip that out, because then inadvertently you're going to leave a little bit more than what you want. You can see that now that I've clipped it, that I don't have an issue. I don't have a problem with that stem. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of take some wraps, lock that back down. Going to come right up behind the post. Then I'm going to jump over to the back side towards the bend of the hook. When we dub the thorax here, I'm just going to turn to a superfine. Got my little pack of superfine here. I'm going to be using this here, which is pale mortine done. That's actually what it's called. So makes it a little bit easy if you're tying a pale mortine down. And I've just got a wispy piece, and that's what you want. Don't go overboard here. It's easier to add a little bit of additional than it is to try to remove, especially superfine, because it does, as you can see, it kind of, you can see my dubbing rope there, or noodle, or whatever you want to call it. It's a little harder to remove off after you've got it in. So now I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to put this dubbing down, and I do want my thorax to be a little bit more pronounced, as it should be. And that was enough to get me through to the back. And then I'm just going to reach back over really quickly. Now I'm going to grab myself another little bunch of the PMD dubbing. It really doesn't take long, so don't worry about underdubbing, because really it takes just a second to get more dubbing on. So now I've got more dubbing on here. I've got that wrap back there. I'm going to take a couple of wraps back here. I'm going to go back up towards the eye. And then I'm going to come back again and just kind of take a couple of kind of X wraps around the post. And what that's going to do is cover up kind of those thread wraps. So we've got ourselves a nice thorax going on here. That's exactly what we want. For me, when I'm tying a post, what I'll do now is I'm going to go ahead and release the pressure on the jaws of my vise. And I'm going to pivot this into a horizontal, so my post is horizontal as well as my hackle, which is going to make it much easier for me to tie this parachute. It's a really good helpful hint if you have had troubles with parachutes, which I have had many times. But I'm just going to kind of move my thread up the post just to make sure I have enough post to wind my hackle up on. And then I'm just going to bring my thread back down. You see my hackle's kind of decided it wanted to come along, but that's okay. We get it moved out of the way. And I'm just going to take this right down to the very, very, very base. But my thread is still attached now to the post. It's not attached to the hook. And once I get that far, now I can just take my hackle. And sometimes it's helpful to grab the McFlylon here. And you don't need a million of these legs, so I'm just going to take some kind of touching turns of this hackle, one right in front of the other, as I work my way down the post, down back towards the body. And again, like I said, you don't need a million of these, so that's going to be good. I'm just going to kind of wiggle my thread through some of those fibers so I trap a few less than I otherwise would. But this is just a few wraps over that hackle feather, and that's just going to secure it to our post and allow us to kind of cut it off, which is what we'll be doing next. So I've got it that far. I'm going to turn my vise a little bit because I want to make sure I cut this off where I'm not cutting off too many fibers, and I'm mostly just cutting this off at the base of the hackle feather. It's like that. And I still have this amount. I mean, I can do probably 2 or 3 more flies with that. So once I've got that kind of clipped off, we have some cleanup to do for sure. We're gonna actually whip finish and finish this fly around the post. So I'm giving myself a little bit of extra thread. I've got my whip finisher here. Again, I want to make sure that these turns are going as close to the base of that post as I possibly can, underneath of these hackle fibers here. If I can get that going for us. So you can see each of these wraps are trying to go as close to around the base of that post as I possibly can. And then when I disengage my whip finisher, I like to pull it away from the hook towards the vise itself. And that'll just help us make sure that that knot stays right at the very base and it doesn't trap quite as many fibers. With that, I can put away my whip finisher. I'm going to go ahead and grab a nice thread cutter here. I'll turn my vise a little bit so I can get right at that base of that thread. Just like that. So now we're detached. We just have some cleanup work to do. As I do my cleanup and some shaping with this, I'm going to go ahead and release the tension on my vise again. And I'm just going to go ahead and pivot that back to that original position. So we're just about done here. Well, our last step is I'm going to go ahead and cut this post off to a length that I prefer. Again, this is going to represent the wing. It's also going to help you see this on the water. Be careful not to cut it too short. It can look like you're cutting it long, and then after you cut it, you're like, damn, that's too short. So there we go. We've got it like that. What I'll do sometimes is shape it, because a mayfly wing or a PMD, which is a mayfly variant, is the back edge of the wing is straight up and down, and then there's, or the front edge is straight up and down, and then there's a bit of a curve to it. So I'm just going to create the most subtle curve here to shape that post. I don't think it really matters. This is probably just me being weird. But hopefully you're able to kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. So hopefully you can see now we have this profile that kind of is nice little curve to it. This is a wonderful, wonderful pattern. I can't claim ownership. I'm not quite sure. I did actually kind of create it from scratch, but I'm sure someone else has done it before. But a great PMD pattern, parachute style, with a nice turkey buyout for the ribbing on the abdomen. So grab yourself a hook, throw it in your vise, and have fun.